Testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3. Can you hear me? I'm just going to do a little bit of a focus check here as well. Okay, we're going to do a little bit of a focus check. Okay, looks good. Can you guys hear me? Check 1 2 3. Check 1 2 3. Just let me know if you can hear me. Thank you. Great stuff. Okay, we're going to get started in about a minute. Just setting up here, making sure everything's all ready. Give the students a few more minutes to get in here, and then we're going to get started. Okay, I think we're about ready. We probably have about a quorum. We have 10 people in here, and I'm pretty sure others will filter in. As it normally goes, and we usually peak around 20 or 22 people. So I think we're good to go. We're going to start, get a couple things out of the way. So thanks everyone for joining me again for another NETS1028 presentation. And today we are going to talk about system logs. And I'm sorry, you know what, I got a really bad habit of never cleaning the board from last class. And we were talking about, symmetric keys and if they're quantum safe and what's going to happen with quantum computers to cryptography when quantum computers come around and they're a little more widespread. What's it going to do to cryptography? That's what we were talking about last class. That's from my Comp 2103 class, which Intro to Information Security. You guys have applied cryptography class this year, so you'll get there as well. Let's just erase that. and get that all sorted. Now, first thing I want to say is I've been marking the assignments, and I marked every assignment up until the third one, which the third one is still due. It wasn't, I think Monday was the last day you could hand it in. So I marked everything on the weekend, got them all. So I gotta say, guys, I am really impressed with how well you guys, some of you guys are, most of you guys are doing all the assignments. Really, really impressed. Like, I'm just, you get perfect, you get perfect, you get 2 marks off, you got 4 marks off. But I mean, like, we're all talking like 80s and 90s and stuff. This is really good stuff. So either I'm making my assignments too easy, or yeah, let's just go with that. I'm making my assignments too easy. We're gonna make them tougher. No, I'm just joking. You guys are just really smart. You're following along. I don't need to make them tougher. You guys are doing a good job. You're picking up on all the stuff that we're supposed to teach and and whatnot. So you're starting to learn about Linux security. And today we are going to talk about Linux security again, but what is it? We're going to talk about system logs. And system logs are some of the most important things on a Linux system. We use logs for security purposes. We use logs for system troubleshooting, a whole bunch of stuff which we're going to cover today. And I'm pretty sure logs are not something that you guys are not familiar with, right? Yeah, you use them in Windows and whatnot, but Linux, it might be a little tougher. So we're going to go through that, and we're going to show you how it works with Windows. I mean, Linux, I'm sorry. All right, so a little bit of overview of this class. We're going to start first talk with system logging introduction. You know how I usually have those animations and everything and give you a good idea, a visual idea of what we're talking about. Then we're going to get a little bit, into how it implements the logging, some commands and stuff, some hands-on with some labs, because we're going to do lab 1. And then we're going to do, oops, I didn't actually fill that all in. Unbelievable. Anyway, so this is just pretty easy. It goes lab 1, lab 2, it goes lab 1, and then we talk about syslog, our syslog. Then it goes lab 2, and then after that we talk about a little bit more in depth into something, and then lab 3, and then we're done. Okay, so it's really not too tough. We're all just focusing on system logs today. So really not a complex subject, but we'll go through it step by step right from the start so you're not confused, because I know Linux confuses a lot of people and we have to make it easy. All right, so first of all, the most simple things. What are system logs? Are these system logs? No, of course not. Drake doesn't think so either, right? These are just normal logs, but no, when most people, I say logs, they think of tree logs or something, right? No, that's not it. How about this? Yeah, those are system logs. We got it now. All right, so system logs are just basically entries. Log, when a program has an error, when a program has a message to tell you, it creates these logs. And these logs are just like, if you think about it, like a piece of paper, like a grid paper, and it's just every line, it's like another message of what happened in this program. So that's all system logs are. It's just kind of like a reporting feature to the operating system of what's happening on the system. This is an example of a system log here. So, I mean, this might be all gibberish to you, and most of it's gibberish to me too. I mean, well, not really, but I mean, like, this log is not easy to read, okay? What is the system D thing? What is, network manager. You might not know that, but you guys have been using that the whole class. It's that MNCLI. Regardless, a lot of logs are pretty cryptic to read, right? They're really tough, but that's okay. We're not focusing generally on the specifics of what's in the logs in this class. We're just going to talk about how the logs on RHEL work, and CentOS work. What are the programs that log things, and how do they do it? Okay, well, logs can log security events like logins, logoffs, and failed attempts. They can log system errors. They can executed programs and commands. So when you're typing, sudo, and then you type in a command, that is logged in your log. It logs mail events if your server has it's a mail server, or if you just even like sending internal mail, like let's say the cron job, a scheduler sends you some mail. That is logged as well. Schedule jobs, which is cron, and system resource usage. That's an important one. Now, we're not going to talk necessarily about system resource usage in this class, but we're eventually going to get into something called SAR. And SAR, S-A-R, logs the system resources on the whole system. And you can get really granular on that. You can have it log like every second or every 5 seconds or every minute or every 10 minutes and just give a general overview of what's happening on the system. And then you can take all those logs and graph it with a program. So logs handle quite a few things. They even handle system startup messages, such as boot messages. So as soon as you boot on that Linux machine, it starts logging right from the first second it can. And it logs all the events all the way up until you get that command prompt. So if something happens in the boot sequence, we typically have a log of that as well. Well, I don't know why that title was at the end of the slide. It should have happened at the start of the slide. Maybe I'll look in the system logs to figure out what happened. So that actually wasn't, that was supposed to be a joke. I know it's a terrible joke. But honestly, when something like this happens, when you have unexpected events like this on your Linux system, like I just had in my PowerPoint slide, there's a log of that somewhere. And so when you do see unexpected events or something that goes, that doesn't seem right, or some program's not loading, or the title should have came up before everything else, something's wrong. Typically there's a log. And my objective in this class is to give you some ideas of where those logs are and how you can manipulate them or look at them. All right, so what can logs be used for? Well, we just discussed a lot of this, security monitoring, troubleshooting system problems, examining resources, and system-wide audits. And that's another one that we're going, I'm covering it, system-wide audits. And that's another one that we're going to cover in a future class. We're going to start auditing machines. Once you understand logs, once you understand file permissions, users and groups, and all the things we've been through so far, we're going to look at a few more things, and then we're going to get into like system audits. I'm going to give you tools. I'm going to give you scripts. I'm going to show you all these things that you should be manually checking on a system. Let's say if you were in a corporation and someone came up to you and said, hey, this system, I think there's a rootkit on it or something. Like, what do you do? I'm going to show you how you can scan that system and what the things is that you need to start looking for. So for example, one of the things you would be looking for, and the reason why we're doing this class in this order, would be that SUID bit. Remember that? Remember when that in the file permissions, when something turned to an S and then it ran with the root permissions? Right there, that's a big security issue that we're going to be looking for in the system audits when we do it in a future class. But logs can also show this kind of stuff as well. So they're very, very useful, and we're gonna try to show you where you can find certain things in certain places. Okay, so how do we store logs? Well, logs can be stored locally on the Linux machine that you're using. Like, let's say this is your Linux machine. Let's say this is a remote server. And logs can be forwarded remotely to another Linux machine called a central logging server. And we're going to be doing some forwarding in this class, not just in this class, but in a future class, to a forwarding logging server, and I'm going to show you how to do that. Now, I'm going to ask the chat, but I'm going to continue to present, but I want someone to give me your best answers. Why do you think we would want to forward logs to a central logging server? Why isn't it good just to have logs on our system? There's a bunch of reasons. So as you think about them, put them in chat. I'm going to continue to present, and then we'll talk about this in a second. So how does CentOS and RHEL manage logs? And remember, when I say RHEL, that stands for Red Hat Enterprise Linux. Sorry, just taking a drink here. You can probably hear my Coke open there. How does it manage logs? Well, there's this one service that's the heart of everything. And this is actually called systemd-journald. And you're going to get pretty familiar with journald because we're going to be using it quite often. Before I continue on this, I'm just going back to the chat. If someone messed up, we can figure out what happened. Very good. Storage issue. That's a really good one. We can use Logstash, Elasticsearch for saving logs too. Hey, look at you. Yeah, the Elasticsearch is a great logging system, and elk stacks and elf stacks. You can use those. We're not going to touch on a lot of those in this class. That's more of an advanced DevOpsy thing or something that you get into a different class. But I can give you some hints and show you how to use that. But we're just going to be managing normal syslogs here and journal D logs. If the system ever goes down or we don't have access, forwarding server is where to look at. Very good, Yash. That's a great one. If the system ever goes down, I'm just going to go back to this slide because we got a lot of great answers here. If the system goes down, if this goes down, right, or gets hacked or something, since this was forwarding event logs in real time to this server, then we can always check what happened on this computer, even if we can't access this computer. That's a really good one. Great, very great. Yeah, great. Another good one. Reduce the time in collecting logs from different machines. So imagine you have one Linux machine and one server. Well, you know, if we were only checking one machine, we'd probably just check this machine, the logs here, right? But what if we had 1,000 machines like this, like we do in a data center? Then it would be impossible to check every single one. So we have it forwarding to a central logging server, and we can use something like Rana had said, something called like a Logstash and Elasticsearch. It's actually called an elk stack, ELK or ELF if you're using a different if you're using Kubernetes or containers. But we can use these kind of systems, but we don't even need an elk stack. We can actually just have a syslogging server sitting on this central server that's collecting all the syslogs from every single machine, or even a journal server. So we're going to be doing that later on in this course. But another reason, and someone didn't mention, is that, keeping track of logging activity. Hey, you guys are great. Look at all these. Another good reason for forwarding logs to another machine is, let's say on this machine, someone manipulated the logs. They went into the history, command history, or the logs that were stored on this machine. Let's say they got root and edit them and deleted them. Well, since they already get forwarded in real time to a central logging server, editing them on this machine is not going to do you any good because the security team already has a copy of that log anyways. So I've seen that happen. I've seen where someone in the corporation, not this current corporation, but it happens in different corporations I've been consulting in, has messed up really bad on a server. They go, oh my, I'm going to lose my job. And what's the first thing that they do? They go into the logs and they try to delete the portions that said that they did something wrong. It's not malicious, but they want to cover their tracks. And then I've been called to look at these servers and go, something's wrong here. Like what? There's just parts of the logs missing here. And then, so yes, I would go to the central logging server and I would see the difference and I would get the delta of what's missing and then present that to management. And then they took action on that. So, you know, you got to be very careful when you're setting up these machines to make sure that they're sending the logs somewhere else. Otherwise, your logging, it could be manipulated. Great, great, great stuff. Prometheus, Docker. Oh, look at Yash. Datadog. Someone's DevOps. Okay, so let's continue on. How does CentOS and RHEL manage logs? Well, it has this systemd thing here. Systemd-journald, which basically means journald is controlled by systemd, which systemd is the main process that boots all the services up and manages the heart of the core of the new Linux operating systems. Systemd journald just keeps a journal of everything that's happening on the system. And that's kind of like what I'm trying to show here. It's just like, imagine someone with a clipboard and a pen and going around and saying, what did you do today? And what did you do where did you go for lunch and all that stuff? And just writing everything down. And that's what the journal is. It writes down everything that happens on the system. It's the heart of the Linux logging system. Okay, it's not syslog like you might think. That has been in the past. So some other people that might have experience with Linux might say, no, syslog is the main logging system. Well, not anymore. Journal D is the main logging system because it has tie-ins to System D. Now, if you don't know all of that, don't worry about it. I'm just explaining it for people who might have different opinions on what the main logging system is. It is Journal D now. And so with Journal D, we have a lot of different systems, a lot of different things on that Linux system that's sending logs to Journal D. We have something called the kernel, which is the OS. And when I say kernel, I don't mean like a popcorn kernel or anything like that. What I actually mean is like the main code that the core of the operating system. It's all programmed in C. That stuff, the stuff that runs the commands you enter and stuff like that. That's the kernel. That's the main operating system. So the kernel sends its logs to Journal D. Another thing that sends its logs to Journal D is the boot process. When it starts booting up, as soon as the first thing when you see grub come up on, if you don't know what grub is, don't worry, we're going to talk about that. But grub is the program that helps Linux load up. As soon as grub starts loading up and the first executions it starts making and looking at all the hardware, it starts logging to Journal D. Demons. What's a demon? Put it in the chat if you know what a demon is. It's not this dude right here. Okay, a lot of people get confused and they see this actual demon, but then demon isn't spelt the way a demon should be. It's kind of like daemon. I always say daemon. I say it all the time. There's something from I used to say a long time ago. I still slip up, say that sometimes, but it's actually said demon. And what a demon is a service, a process. Very good, Yash. In the Linux world, we call daemons processes that are running, that are like, like SSHD, the SSH daemon that's running and sitting and waiting for your connection in. That's a daemon, okay? So daemons send logs to Journal D as well. Those are you can just think of those as the programs that are running on your Linux system, waiting for something. Background processes, very good. And other syslog events send logs to Journal D. Now, don't let that confuse you too much. The only reason I put that in there is because not every application sends something to Journal D natively, such as like Apache service and whatnot. They try to just send a syslog. They don't care about Journal D. But you can configure them to send to Journal D, and then Journal D sends to syslog, and that's the way it should be. So Journal D, and I'm taking off the System D dash, Journal D, I'll just call it, okay, going forward, requires you to be able to interact with it somehow, to be able to read those logs. And how do you do that? Use this program called Journal CTL, Journal Control, to interact with the System D dash Journal D. And we're going to show some examples on the next slide. So the Journal CTL command, or Journal Control, like I have this in green here, I always try to highlight how this name came to be. The Journal Control command just views the contents of the logs in the journal. That's all it does. If you use it with no parameters, you just type Journal CTL and press enter. And if you're on your CentOS machine, you can do this now and follow along. It will just start showing you the logs right from the start where your system booted up. So if you just booted your system up today, you should see logs starting from boot up. And then that's it. And then you can just keep pressing up or down or spacebar and keep going through all the logs until it gets to the current log right now. If you've had your system up and you've just been pausing it or suspending it for days and days and days, like this whole course, there might be a lot of system logs in there. So you might be scrolling for a bit. You can always press Q to get out of it. But you can also put in parameters like that, like -- unit equals, and then a service or daemon. And you can use that, you can narrow down exactly what you want to see in that journal. That's the beauty of the journal. If you guys are familiar with old text logs that we're going to show later that syslog uses, you can't really tell syslog that I just want to see something from SSHD, which is the SSH daemon or SSH service. You can't say that in syslog. You have to grep for it. And I'm old school. I like grepping, but the journal service is awesome because the journal is smart enough to remember which program that actually came from. It just doesn't throw it all in one big text log. So once you get used to the journal, you become, wow, this is amazing. Now I understand why we move this way. Oh, I'm covering my, oh, geez, very good. Thank you very much. Sorry, there you go. Thank you, Ash. Appreciate it. I get so involved, I'm looking at the camera. I don't like to look over here, right? Because I'm looking straight at the camera, so it looks like I'm talking to you. But yeah, I have to look over once in a while, right? I didn't know I was covering it. So I appreciate that. Um, Okay, so you can put like, different parameters to journal CTL. And so for example, sudo journal CTL unit sshd.service, and you really don't even need the dot service here, but you could just go sshd, and it would show you all the logs that are associated with the SSH daemon service. And so it gets really, really awesome to start using Journal. Um, it's much better than scanning log text files. Like I said, you can configure it with a ton of filters, which we're going to go through. Okay, so I talked about this for a while, and I have this lab here, or this assignment. If you want to go ahead and look at assignment number 4, it should be in the assignment section. And go ahead and open it up. This one is actually quite long. I make you fool around with Journal and look at a few other programs to make it work for you as well. Like even like you look at the man pages and stuff. So there's quite a few commands in this next section. I'm going to give you guys about 20 minutes just to get some hands-on experience to go through that assignment and go through all the little steps I have in there. I do take a little bit of a detour in this assignment to show you something called the less command, because when we're in like man pages and stuff, when we press Q, the whole screen always clears, and I find that annoying. And so I'm trying to get you to look at the man pages for some of these commands, and I want that in front of you. So when you press Q, you see it still there, and the screen doesn't clear. You can actually type that parameter in and look at it while you're typing a command in. So there's a little bit of detour. You'll see it in the assignment, which takes a little bit more time. So 20 minutes. Start my clock now. It's 5:25. Let's get back here at 5:45. If you complete this early, go ahead and take a break. We'll see you back at 5:45. Put any questions you have in the chat, and I'll try to respond to them. Oh, and one last thing. I feel that this is probably going to be a short class. So if you want to, you'll have some time to do the unguided sections later on in this class and still be within the 3-hour period. So don't worry about that. You can always get some time later. I bet you any money, this class will go for about an hour and a half. Maybe a bit longer, I'm not sure, maybe 2 hours, but I think it's about an hour and a half. It's rather focused on system logs. I didn't want to throw anything else in there like SE Linux. And obviously we're coming up to the exam, so I want to have some time to talk about that as well. All right, I'm back. So, okay, cool. So there was a lot of great questions there. Well, where we were on break, well, not break, but you guys are doing the assignment. So this is great stuff. That's what I like to see. I love to see those questions. I like to see that you guys are, picking this up. Was there any other questions about the assignment before we move on? No? Okay. Well, just put it in chat if you do have any questions as we're continuing on. Understanding the logging is extremely important. It's really not too tough, but we just have to go through the paces. Okay. So this is where we left off. We left off saying system D, journal D, or with the command that you're interfacing it with journal CTL, journal control, is the main heart of all the logging for RHEL or in CentOS. And that's true. But here's the problem. And Yash, we were kind of talking about this before. If you have a power button, remember, pretend it's the power button for your computer, your server, and then you turned it off. What happens? Bye-bye, journal. It disappears. So Yash was asking, I believe it was Yash, I can't scroll up in my chat there, I'm too far away to scroll up, is that where is this log file that journal D is pulling from when we use journal control? Where are all these logs? They're by default in system memory. So journal D does not write to disk by default. Now, we can, Josh or anyone who's interested, you can set a permanent, you can go into journal D configuration file and set that it's permanent, and then it will go ahead and write to somewhere permanent on the disk instead of just being in memory. So when it's in memory, it's in the /run. When it's writing to a file, it goes in the /var somewhere. I can't remember exact. I think /var journal or something like that. Can't remember. But you can set it so that it will survive a reboot. Now, some companies require this because all those commands, like you want to quickly query what happened to the SSH command before the reboot. If you reboot it, all that previous history from the last boot is gone, unless you had syslog writing to a file somewhere. So that brings us to syslogging, which we're going to talk about next. The logs are only held in memory. They won't survive a reboot, like I said. And you're probably asking, well, why is that? Why does it do that? That's stupid. Well, it's because we don't want to duplicate logs. Because if we look back at this here, boom, let's pretend we turn our machine back on and we have it all logging into journal D again, we use something called our syslog, or syslog, what we usually call it for short. And the back in the day, the reason I just call it syslog is because there's actually an RFC and everything talking about syslog, specifically syslog. It used to be called syslog back in the day, in the old Unix days and the old Linux days. And then over time, there became different versions, different programs of syslog. There was syslog-NG, which is new generation syslog, which is still used today. And then there was rsyslog, which stands for Rocket Syslog. And Rocket Syslog was the one that was adopted by a lot of the great flavors of Linux, especially CentOS and RHEL. So rsyslog became the most popular syslogging program. And syslog is kind of like, you can call, I don't want to call it a template or whatever, but syslog itself is kind of like a protocol that not a yeah, it's a protocol, right? And so basically there's a whole bunch of other programs called rsyslog that implements the syslogging protocol, and then syslog-NG, which implements a syslogging protocol. And it really doesn't matter which program you use, just as long as you understand what you're using and why you're using it. By default, RHEL and CentOS use rsyslog, so that's what we're going to talk about. And most things that you will see these days will use rsyslog as well. So when I say syslog, I'm referring to the program called rsyslog, but it's really called syslog logs. Okay, a little confusing, but hopefully you got it. And rsyslog writes to the disk. So rsyslog takes stuff from journal, the journal that we just used in memory, and its job is to write the files to the disk, the stuff in var log. Those are all syslog logs. Ryan, is there any way we can look for a password for our local host machine? You mean like your user password or your root password? Anyways, just put it in chat. When I see it, I'll respond to it. Our syslog takes stuff from the journal and writes it to the disk. Okay, that's why I have a hard drive here. Okay, depending on the event, our syslog will write to different files. So there are these files like are written to the disk, so they're going to persist, not like journal D. Journal D, you turn it off, boom, gone. Our syslog writes to the files, you turn it off, boot it back up, those log files will still be there. So here are some of the examples of some of the files that it writes on your Linux system. You have var log messages, which are basically logs that are not security, mail, or a lot of these other things here. That's your general logging system. So if you're looking for just a general log that's not a security log or something, it's probably in messages, var log messages. That's one of the primary logs on your system. And the next one is also highlighted in green. And I highlighted these two in green because these are the most common logs that you'll use on your system. Varlog Secure, and just like it sounds, it handles all the security events, all the authorizations, okay, and whatnot. So anytime that you're logging in with an SSH key or logging with a password or there's a password failure, it gets logged in Varlog Secure. Whenever, you type in sudo sometimes and it says, this user is not allowed to use sudo, this event will be reported. And you're like, no, I don't want to know. What's it going to report to? The elders of Linux or something? No, there's no elders of Linux. Oh, I'm covering again. Sorry. It reports to varlog secure. So don't worry about that. So anytime like a user that tries to use sudo is not authorized to use that, it will report in varlog secure. And then we have other ones like varlog boot.log. And yes, that actually has .log at the end. Just someone decided and that's how it is. And the other ones don't have .log on the end. That's it. I don't know. And so that's just the boot and startup messages. So when you type journalctl and you press enter and you saw all the first logs there, if you were to look at boot log, you would see all those first logs as well. And there's also something also called dmesg, D-M-E-S-G. If you type that command in like this, D, like this, okay, and I'll put this up on the screen here. And I don't talk about this a lot in this class, but we will explore this later, is dmesg predecessor. We'll show you the boot logs as well, and also the core messages of your, it's called a ring buffer. This is like looking into the kernel, what the kernel really thinks is important. You're going to see in that command right there. But a lot of it is logged in boot log and in your journal as well. So if you know where to look, you can find it there as well. And then we have the varlog cron, which is just scheduled job logs from cron. And cron, C-R-O-N, is just a scheduler. You know how in Windows you have that Windows scheduler? Well, in Linux, it's called cron. Okay, and so anything that's scheduled will be logged in varlog cron. And then we have varlog mail log, and that's not really a hard one to understand. Anything that pertains to mailing functions on your system will go into the mail log. Okay, so it's divided it all out. And I know a lot of people were asking, hey, where's the main syslog? When we're using our syslog in under RHEL or CentOS, it's divided into a number of different logs. It's not just like one syslog anymore. Okay, I'm going to look back at the chat here. Any way we can look for password from our local host machine? Ryan, you're covering the screen. Yeah, I know, sorry. What permission does syslog have? Oh, good one. Syslog runs as the root user, okay? Because it's running with the systemd and all that stuff. Well, you'll see. Yes and no. Okay, so this is our diagram. We have, all of the things on the system reporting to journal D, not reporting to syslog like the old days. The old days, journal D didn't exist, and syslog was the heart. And all these programs used to report to syslog. Well, these days with systemd, everything reports to journal D, and then journal D has a module that links to syslog. Well, more like syslog has a module that links to journal D, and syslog constantly pulls all the new logs from journal D and writes them to a disk, okay, like that. So that's how it any questions on this right now before I move on and we start drilling down on syslog? Any questions on how all this works? Because I know a lot of people old to Linux and new to Linux get confused because this whole journal D thing in the middle. Just remember, this is not persistent. These are in-memory logs by default. Everything reports to it. And the reason they do that is because it has a high hook into System D, which is the thing that controls all of the services on the machine and SE Linux and everything. And then syslog, if you look in the syslog configuration, if you're really nosy, you'll see at the top of that syslog configuration file that it has a module to link to journal D, and that module constantly looks at the new logs coming into journal D, reports them to syslog, and then syslog sorts them and puts them in these files to write to disk. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. Now, how our syslog works. Let's drill into our syslog just a little bit here. Our syslog logs stuff. It's a daemon, okay, and it sits on. It's always running on your computer. Well, it should always be running on your computer. It runs on by default, and accepts login events from different programs and sources. And it doesn't always have to be Journal D. When I say, programs and sources, yes, Journal D is a program, right? It's a daemon that's supplying logs to our syslog, but our syslog doesn't always just have to take stuff from the journal. Our syslog can take things from Apache server or Nginx, and Apache and Nginx don't report directly to journal by default. You would have to fandangle some stuff there. Apache and our syslog, they like to report directly to, Apache and Nginx like to report directly to its own files, own logs that it creates, and directly to our syslog. So now with the System D tie-in, it does do a little bit of that, but you just have to be aware that some programs on your computer that you install will not talk directly to the journal all the time, and they'll try to generate their own logs. Okay, so that's just something to remember. Our syslog sorts log messages by a facility and a priority. Now I'm going to go back to this slide here because I told you they sort. So remember, everything that's coming in from Journal D, it's just a bunch of different logs here, and they're all from a bunch of different sources. Now Journal D has gone ahead and sorted it. Our syslog has to have a way of sorting this as well. So when it receives the events from Journal D, it puts them in these log files here, but how does it know which one to put into secure or which one? Probably too small for you guys to see. I'll try to get the magnifying glass. How does it know which one to put in var log messages or var log secure or boot log or the cron or the mail log? How does it know which event to put into which one? So the way it does that is it sorts everything using a facility, and we'll talk about that, and a priority. Well, priority makes sense, like something's a high priority or a low priority, right? We're going to drill through all of that in a second, but what's a facility? I always like to think of it as, you say, hey, are you going to go to the kitchen facility? Like we call kitchens facilities. We call bathrooms facilities, right? They're just something that provides a service or that you can do something in, right? So you could always say, hey, pretend if you're thinking about a house, is you have a kitchen facility and you have a bathroom facility, and you wanted to log all the events from the bathroom into a log called bathroom, and all the logs from the kitchen into a log called kitchen. Well, when Journal D or any of these programs send a log to our syslog, it tells them what facility it's from. So if you had a kitchen service, the kitchen would say, hey, we got cooks in here. We just cooked a new burger. It's coming from the kitchen facility. Or if you're in the bathroom, there's some pretty pretty funky log systems that we could have in there. But let's just say, hey, I just brushed my teeth. I'm in the bathroom facility. And so our syslog gets these announcements from different facilities, and it knows basically based on that facility where it needs to sort these logs. And so obviously we don't have a kitchen and a bathroom on Linux, but we have all these different facilities. And I apologize if this text is a little small. We have these different facilities, and they're not kitchen and bathrooms, but it's a mail facility, right? Think of that as a mail room. Anything that happens on the mailing servers or the mailing programs will be from the mailing facility or the mail facility. Anything that comes from the kernel, the operating system, that that boot can, everything that's happening in boot, or any crazy things that are like happening, like buffer overruns and underruns from the kernel or anything, from the deep down in the depths of the kernel will come through the kernel facility. Anything that's come from the scheduler, which is cron, will come from the cron facility. I mean, you get the idea here. There's lots of facilities, more facilities that I list here. There's lots of them. And you can go ahead and go into the man pages and find tons of different facilities. I'm only listing the ones that I think that we need to focus on for this class. Another very important one is the auth, or the auth priv facility. And those are all security and auth messages. So just think of your Linux machine as having all these different rooms or programs, or however you want to think about it, and each one is called a facility. And along with that, each facility will have a priority. So if think about this, if we had a kitchen facility and there was a fire in the kitchen, we would call that an emergency. So we would say kitchen emergency. We would group those together. So we would say, hey, there's a fire in the kitchen. And then the way we would say is kitchen and emergency for facility and priority, okay? Or if we had, maybe an informational message from the bathroom, we could say, hey, the facility is bathroom, and the priority is info, I just finished brushing my teeth, right? So we can have different priorities on these facilities depending on how important that log message is. And so obviously, Linux doesn't have bathrooms and kitchens, so let's take it back to the facilities that actually exist. Auth priv is a facility that takes care of anything to do with security on the system. And the way we would group the facility and the priority together is we separate them by a dot. So we go auth priv dot, and then we put a facility, or I'm sorry, a priority. And the facilities I'm always going to highlight in purple just to make it easy. And the priorities I'm always going to put in green to make that easy. Just color code them. But you can see I didn't put emergency info or crit or error or anything here. I put a star. And in Linux or in most computer programs, when we say star, we mean all of it. But yes, star means all priorities. So what this actually means, what this actually means is if we go authpriv dot star and we send a log, to this here, it's going to take, syslog will say, hey, that basically when you say authpriv dot star, it means I'm going to accept any logs from authpriv, which is private security logs, any priority of them, and I'm going to do something with it. Okay, well, let's take another one. Let's take another facility called mail. We're all familiar with mail. If I go mail.star, that means syslog is going to accept anything from the mail facility, so mailing programs, mailing servers, and any priority there that they want to send. So let's say it's an emergency, the mail server crashed, or let's say if it's just an informational thing, hey, a piece of mail got sent. Okay, so it will accept all of those kind of priorities, all those different log messages. All right, well, let's replace that priority with error. So if I said I want to accept all log files that have from the mail facility or the mailing program, but only with an error, non-critical error conditions, it will say any priority that's error and below. And it's kind of weird to think about it. I say usually, it's a higher priority, but I'm just thinking the number system here. So error and below, emergency is 0. So error, critical, alert, and emergency. If I say mail.error, it's going to take errors. It's going to log those. It's going to log critical stuff, and it's going to log alert, and it's going to log emergency. So the way this works is when you put a priority here, it takes that priority and logs everything below it as well. All the more major priorities, okay? Below it, above it, however you want to think of it. Basically, it goes all the way back down to 0. So if you say, hey, mail.info, it's going to log any info mailing logs. It's going to log notices. It's going to log warnings. It's going to log errors, criticals, alerts, and emergency. But since we're just saying errors, it's going to log mail errors, mail critical conditions, mail alert conditions, and mail alert emergency positions or logs, situations. If I said mail.emerge, it's just going to log the absolute emergency priorities for mailing. So that's what you have to remember about the priority, is that when I put a priority there, it's going to log that and everything that's more critical than that. Does that make sense? I'm going to read the chat messages here. Can we filter the logs in syslog? Can we filter the logs in syslog? As you know, it is quite messy. No, you can't. That's the problem. And so once you have you're talking about the file, right, Rana? Like the actual file, like varlog secure or something. No, the only way you can filter that is with the grep command or sed command, if you know sed, stuff like that. So the way most old school people do is they go like this. They would go, so if I was, and I still do this, I don't use the journal as much as I should because I'm old school, but it doesn't matter which one you use as long as you understand how it all works and what you're comfortable with. I use the journal when I'm specifically looking at a service. But most of the time I'm looking for random names and things. So what I would do is, let's say if Yash was trying to log on to my server and I was trying to figure out why his password was failing, I would go something like this. I would go, I would typically go, thinking about the easiest way to show you. There's a way I do it, but also what most people do it. I would go, okay, so I would usually do this. And you can do this by just going grep as well, starting with grep instead of cat. But usually I cat the whole file. So I cat var log. That's supposed to be a slash. Slash var log, and then secure. And then what I do is I go pipe and then grep. And then I would go like probably, well, I just go Yash. Right? And so cat slash var slash log slash secure pipe grep Yash. And that would show me everything in the secure log that would have Yash's username and would able to show me if there was a password failing, if there's an SSH key failing and why it was failing. So that's the way you filter with syslogs. Now there's obviously an easier way to do that. You could go journal CTL, SSH, right? The -u equals SSHD, right? And you could look in that as well. And so that would be able to, and then you could filter down to only look for Yash as well. But Journal D is like a rabbit hole. I mean, it starts off very easy, and there's a lot of filters that you can use to start filtering different strings inside that journal. But I still find if you're looking for a specific keyword and you know you're looking for just security events, looking in the syslog and just grepping for Yash is the quicker and easy way than trying to figure out all the specific like filters and everything for Journal D. Now, I know a lot of people got familiar with it and they use it, but if you're old school, you usually just use the syslogs. But you know what? There's no right or wrong way. You can use whatever you feel is best for you. Now, remember, the one thing about the syslogs is by default, they do, one thing you remember about the journal, is by default, every reboot, it kills the journal because it's just kept in memory. Now, you can make that permanent, but syslogs survive a reboot. So if I'm looking for all the stuff on Yash, and maybe it might not be today, maybe it was last month before I rebooted the servers, the syslogs are going to have it, the journal's not going to have it. Now, you might ask why, why we wouldn't use, why we wouldn't make the journal permanent. And there's obviously good reasons why we would, but the reason we don't, and the reason it's not enabled by default, is because we don't want the logs in two places. Typically what we do is if we're really concerned about certain logs, we take the journal and we configure our syslog to log it to a specific file. And we use our syslog as that permanent source to log things. That's just the way it is. That's the way that Linux gurus over the years have found that we should do things, because things still depend on syslog being there. We can't just remove syslog. Stuff like Apache and Nginx and everything still depend on syslog. So
we can't just remove it like a root canal and just put journal D in there and have it replace everything. Maybe in the future, maybe rel 9, rel 10, that's eventually going to happen, but still in rel 8, we're still dealing with syslog. So it's not going anywhere anytime soon. What's the big difference between none and priority? Oh, very good question, Yash. So none, if you go mail.none, and we're going to see that in a few examples coming up, that means what? Don't log anything from mail. Now you would say, why would you try to log and say, I want to log stuff, but don't log anything from this facility? Well, it's because you combine facilities. We're going to see that in one of the next slides. Okay, so just quickly what I was talking about here, go back. So mail error, like I said, will only take the priorities from error and below, or error and above, or however you want to say that. Just the more critical errors above an error. So you're talking, you know, the critical alerts and emergencies and errors. So just understand that when you say mail.error, it doesn't just mean errors, it means everything more critical than error plus error. And so auth_priv, if we're looking at this again, it writes logs from a facility and a priority to a file on the disk. Our examples write all priorities from our example writes all priorities from security and auth messages to varlog secure. So in this example, if we take, we actually give auth_priv.star, we're saying we want to log all the security messages from private security messages of all priorities, and we're going to put it in a file called varlog secure. And that's actually how syslog is configured right now. Let's go ahead and look at what the rsyslog configuration file looks like. So it's not a mystery anymore. And if I open up Vim, okay, now you can go ahead and install Vim on your computer if you want. Since it's a minimal install, Vim is not currently installed on your minimal install, and Vim makes things colorful. So if you really wanted to make it look colorful, like if you wanted to look at this rsyslog, you can go ahead and type this on your Linux machine. You can go sudo yum, and yes, I could put DNF, but I'm old school. Install, and then type vim, V-I-M, and then -y. And if you put sudo yum install vim -y, it will install the Vim program for you. Now, if you're not familiar with Vim, it's a little tough to use. Like even to quit out of it and stuff, and to insert stuff, it's not as easy to use as Nano. So if you're going to use Vim, you definitely can type Vim and then look at this file here. But just be aware that it's not easy to use like Nano and stuff like that. You probably should take a Vim tutorial at some point, because Vim is actually quite used, and Vi as well, in the computer world. Yeah, old habits die hard, right? So, okay, so if this is a program, I used Vim to look at this. This is why this is all in color. The comments are in blue, and the actual info lines to configure the logs are in white. But if you look at this like with less or something like that, it won't be color-coded like this. But that's okay. You're just gonna have to pick through it a little bit. This is the main rsyslog configuration file. And remember I told you we take everything by the facility dot the priority, and then we tell it the log file that we want to log it to. So let's take the last example we were just talking about, auth_priv.star, and it's logging to varlog secure. That's all it takes. It's just that simple. It looks a little confusing at the start, but it's really not that tough. Auth_priv.star saying, I'm going to take all the private security logs that are sent here into rsyslog and of all priorities, and put them in varlog secure. Now, it doesn't matter how many spaces or tabs you have in through all these. It doesn't matter. You can put 1 space, you can put tabs, you can put 10 spaces, just as long as there's some white space separating the facility dot priority with the actual log file that you specify. And so here's another one. You know, here's cron, and there's a whole bunch of them here. These are all of them, by the way. There's not any more. I fit them all on the same screen, but we're going to go ahead and look through each one of them. Now, before we do that, I wanted to say one more thing. because you're going to be addressing this in one of your assignments. This is the main rsyslog.conf. It's actually an etc rsyslog.conf. There is an rsyslog.d, etc/rsyslog.d directory as well. And anytime you see a .d directory, typically what that means, it's a configuration file for a program, but any configuration file you put in there with a .conf on it will be read by that program upon boot. So when we go ahead and add, when I'm going to go ahead and have you add things to this rsyslog program, I'm not going to have you edit the main rsyslog configuration file. I'm going to have you add in the assignment the new configuration into the rsyslog.d directory. And that's the accepted way that we like to do things in Linux. We don't want to edit the main configuration file if we don't have to. We want to add any new things to the .d directory. So any new person that comes on that system will quickly look in the .g directory to see any changes that have been made on top of the default configuration file, if that makes sense. If you edit the default configuration file, then it's hard for someone to come in and see any changes that you made here, unless you obviously commented or whatever. And sometimes you need to edit the main configuration file. Let's say if you actually wanted to change the secure file to something else. Now, I don't know why you would, but maybe in the company they say we want it in varlog system.secure. I don't know, whatever. Or we want to put .log on all the ends of these files or something. I mean, that's crazy talk because now you become non-standard, but hey, who knows what the company might want to do. And that would be a reason why you would want to go ahead and edit the main configuration file. But if you don't have to change any of this stuff and you're just adding a new log or something, you want to put it in etc rsyslog.d directory. You just created a comp file in there, okay? So here's the one we talked about, authpriv.star, and all this basically means is taking all the private security logs of all priorities and logging them to varlog secure. The next one we have is mail.star, and that's just taking all the mail logs and putting them to varlog mail log. And then we have cron.star. And if we, this is taking all the scheduled jobs that have the cron facility and of all priorities and logging them to varlog cron. And then we have this emergency. So what this is a little different. What's happening here? We have star.emergency. So what this is saying of all facilities, anything that's an emergency, put it to what? are. I'm just joking. I do know what that means, and I'm going to tell you in a second. I just wanted you to understand that this isn't a specific log file. Okay, means it's actually logging to the console. And so what it's saying here is it's saying all facilities, whether it be mail, security thing, a kernel thing, a cron thing, if it's an emergency, if it's a priority emergency, like the system's going to go down immediately, oops, I didn't mean to do that, log it to here. And what this means is log it to the console. It will show up to everyone on the system and even the main console if you're logged in. So that's what that is, okay? And so then you have the star here. Don't worry, you just need the star there to make sure that it logs to all the sources, okay? So that's kind of a special thing. And if you read the rsyslog configuration manual page, it will tell you what, get into this a little bit. But you don't have to worry about that. Basically, it's just making sure that if you're on the console, that it's going to display to everyone an emergency situation. It's not going to just log to the log file and wait for someone to look at the log file. The system's going down, something happened that's going to affect you right now. I'm logging it to the console. Okay, and it's going to show up on your screen no matter what you're doing. And then we have this one. This one is taking the UUCP and the news facilities and logging anything that's critical and above to varlog spooler. All right, we didn't talk about the news facility, the UUCP, and don't worry about that. We're not going to worry with that too much. And then the last one we have is local.7.star, and that's logging to varlog boot. We had these local 0 to 7 custom sort of facilities that we can configure and use. I'm not going to worry too much about that in this class. Just understand they exist, and the boot logs are configured to use that local.7 facility. All right. All I really want you to focus on are these top three here. All right. And this one up here as well, the messages, which we really didn't talk about, but I'm going to go ahead and talk about now. You can see we can group a whole bunch of facilities and priorities together. And remember, someone asked, what is none? Okay, well, I can show you up here. What this is saying, this first line here, this var log messages, which is your main message, which is your main log file on your system. It's saying, take any facility that's info and above, for basically all the priorities, okay, of all the facilities. Take all the logs on all the system, basically. But don't include anything from the mail facility. That's what the .none means. And don't include anything from the auth_priv facility. And don't include anything from the cron facility. Now, why do you think we have those like that? Why do you think we make sure that the mail isn't included, auth_priv isn't included, and cron isn't included? There's different reasons for each one of those. I want to put in the chat if you think you can figure those out. Why we wouldn't want auth_priv in the main messages log. There's a very good reason. And why wouldn't we want mail or cron in the messages log in that main general log system? Well, I'll tell you the ones for mail.none and mail.cron. It's because we don't want duplication of logs. We're already logging all the mail stuff to varlog mail log. And we're already logging all the cron stuff to varlog cron. We don't want it logged here and here. That doesn't make sense. It's duplication of logs. There you go. Yeah, very good. No, that's great. That's exactly what I was looking for. I see the chat there. Go sleep goodbye. That's a cool name. I love that name. Is that your official name? We also have auth_priv.none. And there's two reasons for this. Now, number one, all the auth_priv stuff, all the security stuff is being logged to varlog secure. Okay, well, that's one reason, just like that we don't want to duplicate, right? But if you think about it, do we really want security logs, private security logs in our main varlog messages? No, we don't. What if we gave varlog messages to random admins, but only security ops could look at varlog secure? So by separating all the main security logs outside of the messages logs, that provides a little bit of decoupling from security and normal messages as well. Very good, Tanya, very good. Yeah, that's perfect. I'm glad you guys are following along. Okay, so that's all. It's not extremely tough. It's sometimes hard to get your head around the facility and priority, but I hope the assignments that I give you in the next part will kind of make sense of all this for you. So here it is again. I'm just providing these tables again for you, so you can have these side by side, and you can see, like, remember, there's a lot more facilities than these ones. As you can see, there's UUCP and news that I don't have in here, but I'm just focusing on the ones I think that we should focus on. But understand in your travels that there's many more facilities, and you'll see them as time goes on. All right. Okay, why am I doing this again? Oh, okay. I didn't know. I first highlighted them and I went through them again. Okay, so here you go. So here's the auth_priv.star. We're just going to go through this really quickly because we already talked about this. And then we have the mail system, and you can see the mail facility and all the priorities because it's star. And then we have the cron facility and all the priorities because it's still star. And then we have the emergency, which is a little different. Only emergency priorities, but all the facilities and all the other facilities I don't have listed here as well. And that's it. I'm just going to go take you back to this where we left off, and we're going to look at this overall overarching of how all the log systems go together. So we just talked about our syslog, and down here now our syslog's job is to take it all from journal D and sort all those facilities and priorities and log them into files on your hard drive. Okay, so that's pretty much all we need to cover in terms of the rsyslog stuff. I do have some other tidbits and stuff inside the assignment, so I want you to go ahead and take the next 20 minutes to look through the next part of the assignment, lab 2. And I want you to, view the logs generated by rsyslog, explore how rsyslog configuration files work and create your own and test. That's what we're going to do in this next part. So take 20 minutes. It's 6:30 now. And just go ahead and get through that assignment as well as you can. If you don't finish in 20 minutes, don't worry, take your time. This is pretty much the end of the class anyways. I told you it was only about an hour and a half to 2 hours. And I'll be back in about 20 minutes, so 6:50. Just before 6:50, I'll come back. And if you have any questions while you're doing this, please post them in the chat. Teams chat. Okay, yeah, I will. I'll have a look in Teams chat while we're taking this while you guys doing the assignment. Yes, we will talk about the exam after we're done these last couple slides.
Okay, I'm back. How's everyone doing with the assignment? Are you guys done the guided part? Okay, if you're still working on the guided part, don't worry about it. We're not going to do any other assignments after this. That was the last one. So I'm just going to talk a little bit. You can kind of pause what you're doing if you can't do two things at once. And we'll just continue on here and bring this class to a close so you're not sitting around forever. Okay, well, that was the end of the class. There's, as you can see, there's a lot in the assignments portion, like the, let's wipe this off here. The guided and unguided part. There's quite a bit to do there. So most of this class is very practical instead of theory. Because really, to understand logs, you really need to get your hands dirty and get into the commands and just really start playing around with them. Nothing's really hard or anything. It's just a matter of, you know, figuring out how the journal works and figuring out how the syslogging works and stuff like that, and where the logs are used. And also, there's quite a bit of, you know, Linux tips and everything I've given you in that assignment as well. I like to give you Linux tips as we go. I like to teach people how to use Linux, little tips and tricks and stuff. I think it helps you. It's going to help you in your career. It's going to help you in this class. So when I kind of go off the beaten path and show you a new command that's not even security related, that's what I'm trying to do there. Just trying to make your life easier working with Linux. Little tips and tricks I've learned over the years. So, okay, so what you need to do before next class is you need to practice all the commands and concepts presented in this lesson. I mean, it's the same thing every time, right? You have to do all the guided, unguided labs in this assignment. Finish assignment 4, which I just gave to you. 1 minute late equals 0. And you guys are all really good at this. You're all getting in on time. I'm very happy. Absolutely no exceptions. Practice, practice, practice. You know, make sure you understand how the logs work, because honestly, if you don't, then you're really going to be at a disadvantage in this class as we get past the midterm into the second part, when it gets a little more, okay, now we know the basics. Now I'm going to start throwing applications at you and ask you to configure them and or maybe give you something broken, or maybe give you something very insecure and say, what's the problem here? And then, you know, you might have to go and look at it and do some analyzation of it, know where the logs are. I'm not going to step you through it. I'm just going to say, you know, go back to your other assignments. Have a look at what we did with your other assignments and try to figure it out depending on what you know now. So it's going to start to ramp up a little bit. I'm going to start to assume you know how the syslog, where the syslog is. Not necessarily, you know, creating your own syslogs and all that stuff. I just kind of wanted to show you how to do that for this class. But also, you know, where to look and which logs are important and which logs, you know, you typically don't use. Like messages and secure are the most important ones on your system. And the journal is extremely important to find out stuff, you know, specific daemons and stuff, right? And so all that stuff is going to become very useful. After the midterm exam, we're going to talk about something called SE Linux. Okay, and this can be kind of a complex subject. It's really not too tough. If we go slow and if we explain and I just don't throw it at you. We're not going to become SE Linux gurus at the end, because that would require a whole course on SE Linux. Like, no one's an SE Linux guru except the guy who made it. Now, there are gurus out there, but they spend a lot of their life playing with SE Linux and creating policies and whatnot. It can get rather convoluted
I can't even speak today. Get rather complex, let's put it that way, pretty quickly. And but on the surface, we need to know how it works. When something breaks on the system, we need to be able to know where to look, because it just doesn't pop up on your face why something's not working. It's behind the scenes. This is stopping you. So we're going to look at that. We're going to look at how you can manipulate things, how you could fix policies when this thing stops you from doing things. And then after that, we're going to get into more system examination, start using a lot of the stuff that we learned all the way from creating users in groups, to logging, to file permissions, to SE Linux and all that stuff. And then start looking at programs and how they're running and how secure they are and doing system inspection. So that's all coming after the exam. So this isn't going to be on the exam. Don't worry about that. If we didn't miss a class, then it would have been. And you're dodging a bullet there, because that one can be kind of tough. But we'll save it for the after the exam. The thing you need to know for the exam is anything that we've covered thus far, and it's really not too difficult, right? We got users and groups. We have, oops, let's just get that finished, and I'll bring this up. We have users and groups, permissions, a little bit of Docker stuff. You know, you don't need to know a ton about Docker. I just need you to know, maybe you remember how you had to add yourself to the Docker group so you could use Docker as a non-privileged user. Stuff like that, right? That's what I'm focusing on. I'm focusing on the security, portions of stuff, not necessarily the Docker itself, but how we can use Docker securely. That's what matters, right? We're going to do some stuff on file permissions. That is a big part of the exam. Understanding how different, if I'm going to show you some file permissions. I'm going to ask you, how does this how does this affect different users on the system? Those special file permissions, such as the sticky bit, the SUID bit, the GUID bit, what do they do? How do they work? Stuff like that, and then we go into the system logging and stuff, and anything that we've talked about up to this point. Again, nothing of this is too difficult. It's more about just practicing. And it's going to be the exam next week is going to be a full written exam. Okay, I said there's going to be some practical component. We're going to do the practical component after the midterm, more kind of like a mini project. Okay, I was going to do it before the midterm, but since we missed a class and we have to make that up sometime in the next after the midterm, we're going to do that mini project after, because I have to teach this first. Okay, so don't worry about that. There will be a practical portion, but you will have a few weeks to do it, and I'll discuss that after the midterm. All you have to focus on in the midterm coming up is only the written portion, and just make sure you have some practice. Go through the assignments. If you can do all of the assignments, every single one, and you generally understand the concepts that I explained in the presentations, you should really have no problem in the exam. I can tell you that right now. I don't throw you curveballs that I haven't taught. I don't throw you stuff that we haven't been over in the exam. Linux is very practical. If you know the assignments, then you should be able to do the exam. Okay. I'm going to go to the chat here. Yeah, what will be the exam pattern and types of questions? Like I said, it's going to be it's going to be a written exam. It's going to be multiple choice. It's going to be like, maybe there's some short answer questions. Nothing too difficult. Okay, Linux is difficult enough. We don't need to. And honestly, a written exam remotely. I mean, come on, guys. I mean, you're just going to open up PDFs in your assignment anyway. So, I mean, what's it proving, right? I'm more worried about the practical exam you're going to get after the midterm. And, well, I shouldn't say exam, mini project, but it'll be grouped in as part of your exam. Okay. That's the more interesting part for me. I want to see if you're able to pull all these things together and make something work, right? Yeah, I mean, I can't stop you. If you want to look at your assignments or your PDFs, how can I stop you? So I could say no, but that's not going to work. I mean, I can't, do that remotely, right? And so, yeah, you can. So that's a good question. I have to rip all the SE Linux stuff out. So My previous exam that I used to give won't work, but I'll have to rip that out and then try to figure out the timing or whatever. But I typically give you enough time. Okay, I don't rush you through it. Again, I'm not trying to fail you here. I'm trying to pass you. I'm trying to make you guys all get good. And honestly, a written exam isn't proving anything in a remote world. So I'm not going to make this super difficult. I mean, it's not going to prove anything anyway. So it's going to be straightforward. You can look at your assignments. You're going to get enough time. I wouldn't stress out too much about it. Okay, if you've done the assignments and you understand them, then you're going to zip right through this. But what I can say though is, if you don't understand enough, if you come into the exam not knowing anything, you're going to not finish the exam because you're going to look back too much on your assignments. I give you enough time so that even the slowest person doing this should be able to, if they know the stuff generally, be able to finish the exam. If you come in knowing nothing and you say, I'm just going to look back at the PDFs or the presentations or the assignments, I guarantee you're not going to finish. So you have to have at least enough information in your head and understand the concepts to enough. And then, when you go, I'm not really quite sure, but I know where to look. That's going to help you. But if you actually have to look through every single thing and watch presentations and everything, you're going to run out of time. No, the PowerPoint presentations are not available. And the reason I do that is because what's going to happen is they're going to get shared everywhere. I try to protect that. I mean, even my PDFs get uploaded to the internet, and that's why we do password protecting and everything. So I don't share the presentations for that reason. I don't trust, not that I don't trust people, but I don't trust people. They share the presentation everywhere, and then my information gets stolen and thrown everywhere, and I don't want that. These are things that I custom make, and it takes me a lot of time, and they're copyrighted, so I don't like to share the PowerPoint. You can always watch the video, and so that's always an option. But I'm telling you, everything that's in the assignment pretty much is, if you can do the assignment, you're okay. Not a lot of stuff is hidden in PowerPoint presentation. Because if you do the assignment, you understood the presentation, right? Okay, so that's what I can say about that. Yeah, it's just written, and yeah, I think I've answered everything there. It's going to be multiple choice, true or false, short answer, all that stuff. Okay. So again, I wouldn't freak out too much about it. It's not like I'm the professor who tries to fail you. I try to encourage you. Linux is hard enough that I don't want to discourage students. I don't want you coming into the exam, taking the exam and totally bombing it and saying, I hate Linux. Okay. I want you to like Linux. I'm not going to make this a terrible experience for you. Don't worry about that. All I'm asking you is to make sure you understand the assignments and the presentations. If you're paying attention to the presentations, you should be fine. There might be some things you might want to review. I mean, you can skip through in YouTube, right? Go look at all the slides as they come. And I don't think it should be much of a problem for you. I think the thing that will probably confuse people the most is maybe the file permissions. If I was to, look at the file permissions, understand that you understand the group, the user, and the other, and the special file permissions and exactly how they work. I am going to quiz you on those special file permissions and how they work. So you got to really understand that. Fire up a Linux terminal and play with it. Like, there are people in Teams that I get a message from at 2 a.m. in the morning. Hey, Ryan, I was just playing with Linux and da-da-da-da-da and da-da-da. How does this work? And so that's what you kind of really need to succeed in life. You need to be playing with stuff just beyond the presentations. And I do get it. You guys have 6 courses or whatever in a semester, and it's a lot of work. I get that. So that's why I'm not like, throwing the whole thing, the kitchen sink at you here, because I know you have a time management issue as well. But what I would say is if Linux is one of your weaker spots, you should put some more emphasis on that because it's going to help you a lot. In security, I'm telling you right now, if you end up in a data center as security ops, 90% of the servers are going to be Linux. If you end up in like a small business, there might be one Linux machine and a lot of Windows machines. But if you're looking to be like in, pen testing and all that stuff, you're probably going to want to really know Linux and put that emphasis on Linux, because Linux and security are like this out in the data center and the real world. You look at all the big companies, Google, Amazon, the company I'm with. I mean, it goes on and on and on. Large data centers, thousands of servers, 90% Linux. The only time people ever use Windows in a data center is when there's some special program that needs to run on Windows, or maybe it's a Microsoft SQL database that hasn't been converted to run, Postgres or something, or some other databasing system. So Linux is going to be a really good skill for you to learn. So I'd put a lot of emphasis on it. Any other questions? These are great questions. And remember, we're gonna the written portion, even though that it's in your syllabus as being like 30% or whatever, it's really only going to be like 10 or 15%. That project, which I consider part of the exam, is going to be the core of your mark. So even if you come in and bomb the exam or you get half, you're only losing 5%. It's not that you're losing 15%. Okay, so stop stressing. I'm telling you right now, don't stress out. Come in, know your stuff, try to do really well. Okay, but most of that stuff you learn is going to be applied to the mini project that we do after the midterm. Okay, and you'll get a few weeks to do that anyways. So that's where you should be stressed. Seeing if you can do this project, and you have 2 weeks to do that. So it's up to you and how you configured that with all the tools and things that I've taught you. The written portion is not the bulk of your exam. Okay, so again, don't stress out too much. Okay, no other questions. I guess we can call that a day. Thank you very much for your time. I tried to make this class very short, because I know you guys have exams coming up and nobody wants to sit into a 3-hour lecture going into an exam. Your time is short. And most of the things I want you to do are practice in the assignment anyway. Is that project has way in total grade? No, not yet, but I will. I'm redoing that Blackboard total grades part. All right, so you'll see that eventually. So, but yeah, don't worry. The written portion is not the core of your midterm mark. Okay, the core is the practical assignment, and again, you have a lot of time to work on that. Shouldn't be too hard, right? It's more of applying your skills on a real Linux machine rather than writing it out in a multiple choice. It doesn't make sense. Real life isn't multiple choice. Real life is, can I take this stuff this crazy guy Ryan taught me and actually do this on a server? Create the users, create the groups, create directories so that only certain groups and users can access certain directories or files. Can I log that stuff that they're doing to a log file? Can I do all of this with SE Linux and all that stuff combined? That's what matters. It doesn't matter if you know A, B, C, or D and can look it up in a PDF. I don't care. I know you can do that. I want to know, can you take all of that stuff and combine it to actually configure a server? That's the important part. Okay? So don't stress out about the written part. I'm only doing it because we're kind of like, it's kind of like a thing. We need to do a written part of the exam, right? But the practical part is where you should put your concern. But it's really not too concerning because you get 2 weeks to do it. You can practice until it works, right? It's not a time limit of 30 minutes, do this. All right, don't worry about that. I'm making it more like the real world. So in the real world, if you were working for me, anyone here, I would say, Tanya, I want you to work with Vicus. I'm sorry if I'm saying it wrong, or Vicus. And I want you folks to go ahead and configure this server and make these users on it, make these groups on it, do these permissions, and I'll give you 2 weeks and I report back to me after 2 weeks. That's how the real world works. So I'm trying to make the assessments like the real world. All right. This isn't like, I'm not teaching you theory here. I'm teaching you practical skills. No shell scripting. The only shell scripts that you will have to use are the ones that I give you. All right. This is a Linux security course. It's not a Linux scripting course. And I know that will make a lot of people happy. It's not a programming course, right? Now, you should know shell scripting going forward coming out of school. You should practice that, but I'm not going to waste your time on that. If there's a shell script that I want you to run, I will give it to you, okay? So don't worry about that, okay? That's a good question. No, great questions. I'm very fair. I'm just trying to make it like real life, right? I want to test to see if you guys can do something. Take a certain set of, like a manager would give you, a certain set of objectives and do it. That's what really matters. And so if I'm going to pass you in this course, I want to say to the hiring manager, whoever's going to hire you guys, yes, they absolutely took a server and secured it and configured it. I'm pretty happy with their performance. And be like, oh, well, what did they get on their exams? Like, yeah, we didn't do written exams. I can tell you they actually put hands on a keyboard and did it themselves, and it was complex. That's what I want to be able to tell. If you ever ask for recommendations, like, hey, Ryan, I'm trying to apply for the security job, and the guy calls me up, I'm going to say, yeah, I gave them, and I'm going to tell them the project that you did. And I'm going to say they did it. And they got a 92. If you let me tell them your mark or whatever, you can let me know that, right? But I mean, otherwise I never discuss marks with employers or anything. I just give them, they're a great person, they've always attended class. I saw them in my classes. They did very well. And, I can speak to your inquisitiveness and how quick you learned, but I'll never give grades unless you ever let you tell me I can. But I want to, and I get this a lot. People call me up, they put me as a recommendation. They ask me, can I use you as a recommendation? And if I haven't really tested you to know that you can put hands on a keyboard and configure a system, I can't really tell this person, oh yeah, well, I gave them a midterm exam and they got really good at it. And the guy, well, what was the midterm exam? Well, it was a remote exam. There was an open book exam. There's no credible mark of that. And the person on the phone is going to be like the same thing. Like, that's not credible. There's an open book test and they wrote it or wrote a Linux test. No, that's not credible. So what's credible is doing these projects and showing me that you can put all these elements together to make it work. That's what's credible. Okay? Hopefully that made sense. Okay, that's it for today. I really thank you guys for your time. I appreciate it. I know it's late, as always. You guys don't understand how much I appreciate you guys sticking around for these late classes. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And we will see you next week in the exam. I will put out, an announcement, just kind of recapping what I said here, that it's basically just a written exam. Don't freak out about it. Study the assignments and you'll be fine. Right? And go over the PowerPoint, go over the presentations as much as you can, skip through, go to the meat and the core of them, file permissions and all that stuff. And, if you have to get a recap on users and groups, check that out. But really, if you can do the assignment and understand the assignments, then you understood the class, right? That's what it works down to. That's how I base my presentations. If you can do the assignment without referring back to all the commands, if you could do it off by heart, you understood the complete, presentation. So, okay, thank you very much, guys. We'll see you next week. And if you have any more questions, just, definitely email me. One thing I want to say is the exam, you have to be on time because it's going to be in a WebEx room. I'm going to get you guys to all join a WebEx. Sorry, I should have mentioned that, but I'll mention in my announcement anyways. And you need to be on time in the WebEx room. So if I say the exam is at 5 o'clock and you show up at 5:05, you're locked out of the exam. There's no late entries. So you have to be on time. I suggest I will open it up like 4:45. And you have to join the WebEx. and make sure you're in the WebEx. If you ever leave the WebEx, I will take a snapshot of who's in there. And if you ever leave, you have to get back in, then, just message me on Teams or something, I'll invite you back in. But I want everyone to be in the WebEx when we're doing the exam. Okay, thanks very much. Appreciate it.